everyone. For this Random Talk Sunday, I am going to be briefly addressing my favorite geographical locations or areas, I guess you could call them. I recently have done a video in regards to my favorite landmarks, in particular human-made landmarks. So now I'm going to address some landmarks that are basically designed to be from nature and come from nature as a result of millions and millions of years of of the earth changing, and not necessarily by human hands. So without further ado, let me discuss a couple of these. The first one that I wanted to briefly address is Yellowstone National Park. I've been to this park before, and it is very beautiful. It has a lot to offer when it comes to wildlife and plants and geographic features, in particular geysers and mountain ranges. It has a lot to offer, I think, when it comes to a national park. I think that it has a lot of beauty to it, and there's a lot to explore, and I think there's just a lot of interesting elements to it that we don't really, that I think a lot of people don't maybe initially think of, like the fact that, there's like these geysers and, there's sort of volcanic activity going on underneath, and we have things like Old Faithful, and again, these are all things that come out of just the beauty of nature and the result of nature. So it's I think something that's definitely worth seeing once in your life if you can. It has a lot of different areas within the park that I think are worth exploring, and again, it covers 2 states too, which is interesting. I believe at least 2, at least from what I've seen, like in Wyoming as well as a little bit of Montana. So it's definitely one of, I think, the most recognized national parks in the world, and I think it's probably one of America's best, and I think it's definitely worth seeing because there's just a lot of variety, and there's a lot of different things to explore and to learn from. Now, the next national park that I'm going to be mentioning in particular is the Yosemite National Park, and this park is also a treat. It has a lot of, in particular, very elevated mountain ranges. I feel like this national park in particular focuses on being really high up and giving you a sort of view of a somewhat desert-like surrounding, because again, Yosemite isn't really like a more traditional national park forest where you associate it with being around areas where there's a lot of water. Yosemite is surrounded by a lot of desert, at least going into Yosemite. So I think that's what makes the drive there all the more interesting, is the fact that it's just this one big national park, and then there's this sort of desert area that kind of surrounds it going there. So I think that's something that's really, really interesting to sort of observe. Again, there's also a lot of wildlife there as well. I would say that unfortunately it has gotten, I think, drier over the years. Especially in summer, there's not a whole lot of water because again, it's a very dry climate. This climate is very um, very it just lacks a, a certain capacity for moisture, and it just won't stay cool there. It'll be really hot during the summer. But again, it does have its seasons with winter and fall and so on and so forth. So it is interesting in how the mountains are structured and how they're so steep they also are there's also a lot to offer when it comes to waterfalls, and there's a lot of camping grounds, and it's a very sort of, I guess, hectic national park. I think it's one of the more busier ones. I think a lot of people enjoy going to that national park in particular. So there is, I think, a lot of different things to see and to observe, and there's different stops. And so if you happen to be curious to going to California, I think Yosemite is definitely worthy to be on the list of places to go. Now, the other national park that I wanted to briefly discuss is the Grand Canyon. This park, I think, is very interesting because of, in particular, how the rocks are formed. It's also very high up, so it's not, I think, generally as hot. At least from the time that I went, and I actually went during the summer, and since it has such a high elevation, it's still in relatively the 70s, so it was at least Fahrenheit, and so it's been, I think, a very rewarding experience to have that level of height and to sort of look down and see all of the different ways the rocks and the mountains are structured. It's also interesting to see how the water sort of flows through the canyons, and I think it's definitely something that should be viewed and explored. There's a lot of different trails, a lot of different areas around the park that can be observed. I think the Grand Canyon in particular is not necessarily noted for wildlife all too much, and more for geological kinds of explorations, like through the rocks and through the water, because again, you can sort of river raft down there. But it's still nice to see it from up high and sort of look down. And I just wanted to note too that the glass thing, that sort of horseshoe-shaped glass thing that you can walk on, that's actually not even part of the park, really. It's on another area, and you have to pay just to walk on it. And to be honest, I don't think that's really something that was really all worthwhile for me. But if you're curious as to what else that you can explore there is that feature that they have. But it's really not part of the park. So, but it's, I think, a really interesting area. There's a lot of history behind it. There's a lot of geology behind a lot of the ways in which the rocks were formed, and the ocean being in particular, I think, a big factor, because the ocean was a lot higher than what it is now. So these are definitely, I think, things worth considering to explore. There's just a lot of variety, and there's tons of different things to see. You can take a mule ride, which is what me and my family did. I think that's a very rewarding experience if you can just kind of walk through the canyon a little bit, or at least go through areas of the park. So I think that's definitely worth considering. Now on to some areas that I haven't explored yet, and some that I have. But the first being the Rockies, in the ones in Colorado. I think these particular mountains are very vast and very beautiful. I remember coming back from Europe, and we would pass by the Rockies, and I remember looking down and seeing it, and I thought it was just a really pretty sight, and there was just a lot of snow, and it felt like it was a huge expanse of miles and miles on end of mountains, and I think it has a lot to offer those who like to explore those kinds of geographical areas. And I think it's something that Colorado in particular offers as a state, and it's something that I think is really well noted in particular during winter time with skiing and whatnot. So I think it's definitely worth considering, and I really enjoy though just the huge expanse of it, and how it just has this huge amount of blanketed snow, which I think is something that I usually don't see in a lot of mountains. Usually there's like these specks, but to see it just completely covered, I think is just something that's very, very, very magnificent, and I think it's just something to behold. So I think the Rockies in particular would be something that I'd like to see. Now, the next area that I'm going to be briefly discussing is actually places that I have explored and places, I guess, that I have not. And these are the Alps. Again, I sort of enjoy the fact that they are so they just have this huge expansive amount of them within just this one particular area. I also like how there's different countries that have Alp mountains in them. I think that's very interesting, and tells you, I guess, a little bit about the sort of geography. It's just very fascinating, the various mountains, the features, the ability to just hike up there. It's very fresh. There's something about the Alps that I feel is just very. It's just this expansive air that you can breathe into, and it just provides a sense of cleanliness, and it just has that it just has that ability to take you somewhere. And I also like too how when you go on various hikes, there's always like a restaurant or something up around somewhere, and I think that's just not only super convenient, but it's also something to sort of look forward to as you're hiking along in various areas. I think the Matterhorn is really the one that's most noted, and I think it's interesting how one side is Swiss and the other side is sort of Italian, and I think there's just a lot of features within the Alps that are worth exploring and that I've maybe never seen yet. And it's just a very nice, cleanly region. There's just a lot of places to explore, and it doesn't feel like so crowded or so, I guess, maybe it just doesn't have the same feel, I think, as a lot of the other, in particular, U.S. parks or national parks do, and they don't really have the same geological features. They just give you a different environment, and in doing so, give you sort of a whole different experience. And I think the Alps are really a sort of feast to behold. So if you have the chance, the Alps are probably a good place to go if you want to hike, ski. You can go during winter and summertime, which is great. There's a lot to enjoy throughout the various seasons. I guess the only problem would be is if you go on a rainy day, it's a lot harder to see anything. But the amount of cleanliness and serenity that it has, I think, is just very refreshing. It's just something very, I think, unique, in particular to me. So it kind of allows you to get away from it all. So I think it's definitely one that's worth recommending. Now, the next area I'm going to be briefly discussing is Mammoth. The Mammoth area, I think, is something that's also worthy of exploration. Different waterfalls, lakes, and geographical features. It has sort of these similarities to Yosemite because, again, they're kind of not that far apart from each other. But I think Mammoth is unique for how it tries to present itself in a way that is designed for winter and for skiing, and also it tries to appeal to summer too, with like biking and things like that. So it does have a lot to offer when it comes to exploration. I think it's noted too for the various kinds of meadows that it has. I think Yosemite is fairly similar. I really like how, although they are fairly similar, they still kind of have a different feel to them. I feel Mammoth is a little bit more smaller. It's not as spread out as Yosemite is, but it does kind of give you that sort of similar environment and similar mountain structure, and maybe not as steep, I think, maybe in Mammoth, but still very very similar. And there is this interesting way that, in particular, the Mammoth village kind of tries to incorporate things that are associated sort of with nature and exploration, like trying to have, stores and things where you could use for if you would want to go camping, or if you would want to go renting a bike or renting skis, things like that. It does really provide you a sense of, I guess, civilization. Maybe not necessarily as much compared maybe to some other national parks, but I think there's still a sense of them trying to incorporate this aspect of civilization by, again, putting in this kind of mall. They have like a little mini Mammoth kind of mall where you can go shop, and then there's restaurants and things like that. So I find it interesting how it just tries to incorporate these things so that it, I guess, makes people's stay the more enjoyable. So I think that's something definitely worth recommending visiting. Now, the second to last one I'm going to be briefly addressing is Zion National Park, which is in Utah. The interesting thing about Zion is that it has these really red, they're just really red rocks, and it has sort of these kind of geological formations that are rather unique. And at the same time, although it has these kinds of dry parts to it, it also has some green and some water, and it kind of combines a little bit of it kind of combines two environments, sort of. You have sort of a more of a desert environment, but then you still have still a little bit of a foresty and green environment. So they kind of culminate together a little bit. And I find that to be very interesting, and I think there's a lot of different things that you can do in Zion, and there's various different things to explore. Again, the wildlife, I'm sure, is also abundant. So definitely I think worth seeing once. And the last one that I wanted to briefly address is Bryce. I guess sometimes they call it Bryce National Park, but or other times I'll call it Bryce Canyon National Park. But the interesting thing about this park is how it's really focused in on trying to be more of a desert climate, because it has like these various pillars that are basically just rocks, and they're kind of like these geological formations that have happened over and over the years, and they're just really interesting to just observe. It's sort of similar to the Grand Canyon, to where you can sort of observe them from up high, but they're really unique compared to the Grand Canyon, because with the Grand Canyon there's still a lot of water and the rocks are fairly spread out, but with Bryce they're very close together, and they have again these pillar-like features of being just tall and just kind of standing up like buildings and skyscrapers. Maybe not as high as skyscrapers, but still they have this really interesting feature to them that I think makes their park in particular rather unique, and I think something to behold of. I should also mention, actually, too, Niagara Falls, I think, is something that would be a wonderful treat to see as well, with the vast, expansive amounts of water. So, yeah, I think that's also something worth considering to explore if you are interested in these kinds of bits of nature. But I think that's really all I can say about my favorite geographical areas, and areas that I'd like to maybe explore more, areas that I've already seen. But if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But until next time, everybody, bye-bye, and thank you so much for watching.